it is. Great, thank you. Thanks, Paul.
Good morning, everyone. It's terrific to be back with you again. I'd like to recognise you, Neil, for organising this event. It must be a logistical exercise of all proportions. So well done, and again, good to be back with you all. Last year, you might recall that I presented my project or my work on the Garrison Files Index. So this time this year, it's probably something a little bit different and probably a little bit more tangible and focused to that I get to present to you today. So I'm really looking forward to it. So what I might do is just quickly flick over to I'll share my screen and bring up your PowerPoint. Has that, can you see my PowerPoint there?
Not yet, no.
Okay, all good. Excellent, here we go. Alrighty.
No, we haven't got it yet.
Okay. How's that?
No, it hasn't come through.
Okay. Yes, I plans. All right, let me throw it onto this screen. Sorry, won't be a second.
This is some editing in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Okay. Okay.
Do you want to put it in slide? Yeah. Do you want to put it in slideshow?
Yep. How's that?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Terrific. No worries. Sorry about that. So the work that I did on the Garrison Files project obviously touched on many different facets to not just the assassination of President Kennedy, but indeed many different topics and aspects of modern history. But probably the thing that I stopped to really focus on the most while I was going through the Garrison Files was the file in there in regards to Lee Oswald shooting. Now I really stopped, and what it basically consists of is Dallas Police's own investigation into their handling of the transfer of Oswald and indeed their response to Jack Ruby shooting him. So what I was able to do ever since was really I began basically collating statements as part of the DPD investigation, and then kind of it became a bit of a rolling ball. I started collecting statements of witnesses from that the FBI took. Then it went on to the Ruby trial, and then of course the Warren Commission, which was kind of running concurrently with the Ruby trial in very early in 1964. And what I was able to really discover was that there are a great deal of narratives that I think have gone overlooked. The shooting of Oswald seems to be a fairly open and shut case, and of course it was filmed and broadcast live, and it's pretty clear that Jack Ruby did it. But all the different there are quite a few little stories and little threads which I've been able to really pick up on and flesh out on in terms of combining statements of DPD personnel, members of the media, right the way up to the House Select Committee's report on it in their 1978 investigation. Which gave probably the most scrutiny in terms of all the official investigations into Oswald shooting. And so basically, a long story short, with all these things that I've uncovered, all these little known aspects to Oswald's shooting, I'm very happy to announce actually that I've been able to put them forth all in a book which I'm actually releasing this week as both a paper book and an e-book. So hopefully that's come up on the screen.
Yeah.
That's the cover. So basically, it's entirely dedicated to the events prior, during, and after Lee Oswald shooting. So really focusing on the media that's present, unravelling quite a few presumed truths, the really uncovering the lengths of DPD, so Dallas Police culpability and negligence in terms of the planning and their response during and after the shooting. Very confidently name names in terms of in-depth evidence and testimony analysis. So when I talk about naming names, it's people that I am incredibly confident and can see in evidence and movements as well, actions on the day, that these people had something to do with helping Jack Ruby get into the basement to shoot Oswald. And in doing so, I consolidated it all to present an evidence-based scenario for how the shooting most likely took place. So really going into probably about as much depth as anyone has in terms of focusing on this facet of the weekend of November 22nd, 1963, and very grateful also to have a foreword provided by Paul Blow as well, which is great. But let me peel back though to a little bit of how I came to be able to put the book together. Now, when I found out that I was going to be presenting at the conference again this year, Neil, thank you for sending me David Joseph's presentation on Oswald shooting. He goes into he went into a great level of detail about how Ruby was able to get into the basement and among many things. So I'm going to kind of, I don't want to cross over too much with David's presentation. I think I've got some other things which I can really focus on, which I think you'll the group today you'll find quite interesting. So for me, it started with, like I said, collating statements from the DPD investigation, which kicked in pretty much straight away. That was headed up by people like DPD. I think he was a lieutenant at the time, Jack Revel, Cornwall, McGagran, who I think went on to be chief of police in Dallas, and William Westbrook happened to be part of the panel which brought together the investigation. I'm not sure if many of you know that name, but I'll certainly come back to that a little bit later. So obviously the investigation, the Dallas Police in investigating itself in terms of the way it handled preparations for Oswald's shooting, was always going to be a fairly quite a conflict of interest. It was never going to be brutally honest, and it was never going to be about giving themselves a full 180-degree review, or forensic analysis on where they went wrong in terms of the transfer for Oswald. But it does serve as an interesting early yardstick in terms of people's statements and where the investigation attributed to people standing at the time. So it is a useful body of work to look over. The FBI pretty much swung in with their investigation straight away as well, concurrently actually with the DPD investigation. It's actually pretty interesting. You would have people, Dallas police officers, give testimony to the DPD investigation, and then the following day, or it might have even been the same day in some instances, they would also give statements to the FBI investigation. And it was really interesting to see how little was told to the FBI compared to the DPD and vice versa. Now, of course, questions would have been asked differently, and the FBI clearly had some very strong themes that they were touching on in terms of their questions, particularly of Dallas police officials. They were really wanting to know, obviously, if anyone knew Jack Ruby, if they were friends with them, if they knew of any other Dallas police officers that even worked for Jack Ruby at a time as well. That's one theme that is very prevalent across literally every Dallas police officer or personnel statement within the FBI investigation. So that was very interesting to note. And of course, as we know, the Ruby trial that came up in March, very early March of 1964. And like I said, concurrently, the Warren Commission, in terms of the hearings, had well and truly started or were starting to ramp up by that time. But of course, they took in and used all of the FBI's investigation, particularly in regards to the Dallas police handling of Oswald's transfer. So really to get this project moving along, I just found myself collecting statements of every single person that was made to each of these bodies. And I could see some, like I said, some really interesting narratives beginning to emerge. So I just kept following the threads, if you like, and kept moving forward until I ultimately got to the House Select Committee report, which I think dedicated 30 pages in its report to Oswald shooting. That came at the tail end of the HSCA's focus on Ruby's ties to organised crime, and we know that was a big area of focus for them in terms of their ultimate findings, if you like, or interest when it came to Jack Ruby himself. I'm not sure if you've all seen this schematic in the background here, but this was actually done by Captain Stevenson for the Dallas Police investigation. Now, it's pretty, it was hand-drawn, obviously architecturally, but then the hand-drawn elements, I suppose, come into these dots, which basically signify where a person was standing at the time that Oswald was shot. So I'll just lay out this map for you very quickly. This is Main Street up here. This is the ramp entrance. So obviously all cars that entered the City Hall basement would do so down the Main Street ramp. And there was a junction at the bottom here where cars would pull into the car park, and when they were leaving, they would come up the ramp to Commerce Street. So the plan that day with Oswald's transfer was that he would be brought down in the jail elevator here. I do have a zoomed version, which I'll show next, but just to give you an overview. Oswald was brought out of the jail elevator and came through the jail office and basically led through the cordon of largely Dallas police detectives to the point where he was shot by Oswald. Now, it was really interesting when I was going through the Dallas police statements. I noticed that there were some irregularities in terms of where people said they were standing versus where the map had them standing. So what I did was I drew all of my attention into actually really understanding exactly who was who on this particular map. And you can see the numbers on here are hand-drawn. They're a little bit hard to read. The colours represent a category of person. So in terms of Dallas personnel, police personnel, the purple colour are detectives. You've got supervisors, lieutenants or higher in the yellow. So this was Fritz, for example. Oswald being the cross there. Ruby, number 90, in the position when he shot Oswald and so forth. So pretty hard to read. So what I did was actually improve this schematic to basically work out exactly what each number was meant to read. And then I would, went back to witness the statements of personnel there on the day to make sure that these were actually correct. And by and large, in this particular section, which I guess we can call the exact, or the immediate vicinity of where Oswald was shot here, it actually is pretty accurate. So these numbers correlate with a list within the DPD investigation. They're in alphabetical order. So number 3, for example, here, that's Reserve Captain Charles Arnett, and Fritz, they're 37, for example. McGee is all the way down the bottom here, 73, and so forth. Now, mixed in with this is not all Dallas police, of course. We know that there were members of the media present for when Oswald was brought out and when he was, of course, shot. But probably just a question to the group. How many, does anyone want to take or does anyone know how many members of the media were present when Oswald was shot?
50 is a
50? Yep.
response.
Yep. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good guess. Now, there actually isn't 50 numbers even on this page. This is, like I say, mixed in Dallas police and media. So what I did was, what I bring to your attention now is these are the members of the media that the Dallas police acknowledged as being present. Now, I'll save you the chore of having to count. There's 22 members of the media. Now, that's not to say that was the total amount of media that the Dallas police acknowledged. It was actually more like 31 that they acknowledged as being present either at the scene or outside, for example, in the news truck on Commerce Street. So we have here 22 members of the media. But what I was able to actually find out through the course of my investigation was that there were actually a great deal more, and like someone said in the group there, upwards of 50. That's a very, very good approximation. What I was able to do, though, and this has been one of the problems with I guess this case, is that there has been such a silence from the media in terms of statements, and when we talk about the total amount of people that were there, we've heard comparatively very little. Very little has actually emerged. But people's statements were taken by the FBI, by the Dallas Police, by the Warren Commission. Some even testified at the Ruby trial. But it's amazing how little people actually saw, despite being right in the vicinity of when Oswald was shot. So what I did was, with looking through the investigations and reading the testimonies of members of the media present, I was actually able to work out where a great deal more of the media were present. So in this particular section of the map, I've added in 16 more members of the media that the DPD overlooked. Now, when I say overlooked, that doesn't mean that they necessarily didn't acknowledge their presence. They just didn't bother to take any kind of statement from them at the time. So a good example would be Peggy Simpson. In the Dallas Police investigation report, she is named as being present, but was not interviewed. Based on Peggy Simpson's account, and she was the only female in the vicinity when Oswald was shot, based on what she was saying, her description of what took place, she was one of these two people. I'm able to confidently say. So that's just one example. But when we think about it, though, there's actually another 8 that there was no statements, there was no way of being able to pinpoint where 8 people, members of the media, were actually were at the time of Oswald's shooting. But we know that they were there because we had witness statements, so fellow members of the media that were that said these people were there. So we talk about reporters such as Ed Haddad. We have people like Milt Soyson, Paul Sisko, people that were there, but most did not or were never asked to give a statement, and never even spoke of what they saw. Even in more more contemporary years, we have had the benefit of some members of the media come out and Dallas Police as well provide interviews for the Sixth Floor Museum's Oral History Project. Peggy Simpson was one example of someone that did that, but that for some people is all that we have to go on. And some of those videos, I mean, they're good for prosperity, I'm sure, but they're not. When we're talking about up to 40 years, some of them being after the fact, they can hardly be reliable compared to obviously a statement that was given in the days, weeks, and maybe even months after the event. So we have 8 members of the media that ought to be circles on this schematic. We know that they were there because other reporters said that they were there, but these people and those that corroborated their presence never actually testified to where they were. So when you say up to 50 people, members of the media present, 100%, that's a very, very, very good guess. So what I've done is I've basically added all of these in this diagram, just added where all my best approximation is of where members of the media were at the time that Oswald was shot. And my count is 46. So this ratio of 46 Dallas police to 46 members of the media represents a 50-50 ratio in terms of one member of Dallas police present to one member of the media. I don't know about you. I'm not sure if any of you knew that ratio in terms of Dallas police that were present in this in the immediate vicinity, but that's absolutely outrageous. That is by far a secure environment for Oswald's transfer to have been commenced during. And I name all of these names in both the DPD and the media in my book. I back up those numbers with the name and position of each person. So 13 members of the media were present, never gave a statement to any of the investigations. So you'll all probably know Tom Pettit. He was the fairly well-known broadcaster back then from New York. He was the man that is probably most prevalent in the front-on photographs and footage of Oswald's shooting. He's wearing the glasses, he's in the light coat, and he's holding a microphone. Tom Pettit never gave a statement, never spoke of it. We never ever heard from him yet. He was obviously there, and he was very, very active after the shooting. He was interviewing Dallas police personnel. He was there's clips of him talking into his camera while people are cutting in front of him, and he's weaving in and around trying to still keep his report going. There's a couple of others that are good examples of members of the media that were there, but were never acknowledged nor asked to give a statement. So Peter Worthington, he was right there. So here's the man that you can see hunching down behind Captain Fritz, and I believe this is Clardy, Detective Clardy. This is where I obviously have placed him on the map because we can see right where he was standing at the time. He was never asked to give any kind of statements. He was an interesting one though. He passed away in 2013, I believe, but before he did that, he did write an article for the Canadian Huff Post, and he was talking about, and he was obviously one of many members of the media that would talk, both at the time and in later years, that said he wasn't asked for identification. And when he was standing around waiting for the transfer to begin, when he first arrived, he had it in his mind that it wasn't happening until 5 o'clock that afternoon. So he was just hanging around killing time, basically, and he was wanted to blend in. He actually said that in his article. He wanted to blend in as much as possible for fear of being kicked out because he hadn't shown his credentials. So he was talking to DPD personnel and taking it all in, and that probably explains well for his slightly odd position when we think about other members of the media that are obviously where this perspective is from, but also Pettit, Ike Pappas, Maurice Carroll, and the unknown Japanese reporter as well. The unknown Japanese reporter is an interesting figure too. I'll come back to him a bit later. This is where he was standing. No one knows his name. People have had good guesses at it, but you cannot find any word from him in terms of what he saw that day. And he was photographed and filmed in the press conference room as well. And there's a famous photograph of Jack Ruby apparently in the at the back of the assembly room / press conference room when Oswald was speaking. And I think just before that, when Henry Wade had come out and made his gaffe about the Fair Play for Cuba committee. The unknown Japanese reporter was there that day as well, and he was obviously hanging around the whole weekend because he made it all the way to being almost front and centre when Oswald was shot. But I just wanted to talk about a few more, a couple of, three intrepid reporters. This is a story of man versus elevator. Now, I'm not sure if you've all have heard of, or I'm sure you have heard of Ike Pappas, Maurice Carroll and Jerry O'Leary. They were all interstate. They had come in to Dallas from New York in the afternoon of, they arrived in the early evening of November 22nd to report on the events at Dallas City Hall. Three interesting characters. They were there for that weekend, but on the Sunday morning, they all went straight to the third floor of Dallas City Hall. I say allegedly because Ike Pappas would flip-flop on that particular point in his subsequent statements. But all went straight to the third floor, and the majority of their media did on the morning of November 24th, because that was obviously the centre of the area of focus for all things to do with Oswald and the Homicide and Robbery Bureau, because obviously that's where he was being held and interrogated and being moved to and from. But by that time, with Oswald having apparently been charged with President Kennedy's murder, the feeling was that amongst the media was that they were going to have less and less access to Oswald. He wasn't going to be paraded through the hallways, because obviously now he was being treated as a suspect formally, as a suspect of President Kennedy's assassination. So there were actually, come Sunday morning, there were markedly less members of the media than had been obviously the subsequent days. You had quite a few that were that had taken up posts elsewhere in Dallas. There were some that were out at Parkland Hospital that morning. Nellie Connolly was about to give they were waiting for her to give an update on Governor Connolly's condition. You had some other members of the press that were actually down at the county jail waiting for Oswald to arrive, because I'm sure, as you all know, Chief Curry had announced to the press that that Oswald would be transferred at 10 a.m. on Sunday, November the 24th. Now that over the years had been translated or kind of changed to him saying that if you got here by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, you wouldn't miss anything. But I was able to uncover specific statements from members of the media that they said, no, at 10 o'clock, that's when he said the transfer would take place. And Seth Cantor is actually a good example of that. He'd slept in, and he only got to Dallas City Hall at 10:40 in a panic, thinking that he would have missed the Oswald's transfer, because he remembered it being broadcast as happening at 10 o'clock. But of course, when he got there at 20 to 11 that morning, nothing had happened, and hence he was able to take up his position and at the time of Oswald's shooting. Anyway, I digress for a second there. I just want to come back to Pappas, Carroll and O'Leary. So they did go to the third floor on Sunday morning to pick things up in terms of what was happening with Oswald's transfer. And Pappas and O'Leary even went as far as practicing running down the stairs, because what they wanted to do was scoop the rest of the media that were by that time starting to gather down in the basement, waiting for Oswald's transfer to start. And I'll tell you why they were doing that. At 10:20 a.m. that Sunday morning, Chief Curry, he came out and he told the press exactly how the transfer would be carried out. He said that he was asked the questions by the media, and he was answering them. They asked how he would be transferred, and he said by armoured car. They said where would the transfer start from, and he said down in the basement. Someone else asked how was he getting down to the basement. He said by elevator. At 10:20 a.m. on that morning, Curry was literally laying out exactly how the transfer would take place. So obviously, hearing that, Pappas and O'Leary thought that they would actually stay up on the third floor and scoop the rest of the press, who were by that time well and truly started to congregate down in the basement, by ensuring that they would be able to be there when Oswald was brought out of Captain Fritz's quarters and taken around to the elevator, and then be able to somehow get down to the basement in time to obviously report on his coming out in the basement. So all three were present for the start of Oswald's transfer on the third floor. Maurice Carroll actually wrote a book in 2015. It's very, I don't know if any of you have read it. There's not much to it. It's very, very, by the numbers. There's absolutely nothing in there of too much, insight into anything that weekend. But of course, for my investigation, I had to read it. So this is a plan of the third floor of Dallas City Hall. So I'll just highlight Oswald's route from the Homicide and Robbery Bureau. So it was the three reporters' idea to picture, ask Oswald any questions on his way out into the corridor and obviously into the lobby here and into the jail elevator. So it's obviously not a very long time to be able to get any kind of access or any questions thrown at Oswald, but that was their plans, and that's what they stuck to. And the idea was that they would then, having seen Oswald loaded into the elevator, run down the stairs from the third floor to the basement to get down there before Oswald would be would emerge in the basement. Tricky thing with that though, I'm just using the same schematic because obviously there's no floor plan of the City Hall basement from 1963. But if we use the jail elevator as a bit of a landmark, this is the elevator that Oswald was put in on the third floor, and it was the one obviously that he came down and emerged out of in the basement office when he was with Lavelle and Graves and company. So just to trace his route, he was brought out here, and if we can just imagine the jail office where I'm walking through, and he came out to somewhere about here, and it was probably more realistically shot round about here. But I'm sure you'll all agree with me that there were no stairs visible in the basement when Oswald was shot. So the question is, how did the reporters get from the third floor down to the basement so quickly when using stairs that did not run all the way down to the basement? Well, they all claimed to have seen him being taken into the elevator, and then said that they were in the basement to see him come out of it. And the good thing is, we do have the benefit of footage, the raw KRLD-TV footage that actually confirms that at least Carol and Pappas made it to the basement. So this is just a still from that footage. That's Maurice Carroll. That's Ike Pappas. So Carroll would peel off to stand just about here, and that's where he would be most prominently seen in the Jack Beers photograph, where the microphone is hanging down over his head. And this is, of course, Ike Pappas talking in the microphone, which is connected to the tape recorder, which he's holding there. So Pappas and Carroll made it to the basement, but O'Leary is not with them, Jerry O'Leary. So just while we're here, I'll just point out there's Worthington, again, Peter Worthington. This is Izzy Blackman. He took footage of Oswald's shooting. And this is Beck from the Homicide and Robbery Division. He was coming out to basically make sure that the cars were in place to get Oswald's transfer started. But yes, moving back to Jerry O'Leary, he was an interesting one. He was adamant that he was down in the basement when Oswald was shot, and that he got there having come down the stairs with Pappas and Carroll. Interestingly, though, these two gentlemen never actually said in their statements that O'Leary was with them when they were coming down, racing down the steps, even though Pappas and O'Leary had been practicing their running of the steps to beat this elevator. So just a very interesting little side note to the Oswald shooting. What is the benefit? What's the purpose of this story? It clearly could not have happened, no matter how slowly moving that elevator was, to come down 3 floors. And these reporters were able to come down at least 2 flights of steps down to the ground floor of Dallas City Hall. They would have had to have made a dash to elsewhere on that floor to then make it down to the basement, to then be where we can see them here, well and truly down in time for before Oswald emerged. So it's just one of those little interesting narratives that I really go into my book and just wonder what the purpose is. O'Leary, though, we can't really forget too much about him because it turned out, Carl Bernstein actually released an article in 1977 in regards to the CIA and the media. Fairly landmark article at the time, and obviously coinciding with the House Select Committee. He named Jerry O'Leary. And Hal Hendricks, who I'm sure we're all aware of, misinformation specialist based in Miami, but Jerry O'Leary named here as a CIA asset. So very interesting to know that Jerry O'Leary of the Washington Star, which is who he was reporting for in regards to Oswald's shooting, may not have been at that time, but would go on, if he wasn't already by then, to work at the pleasure of the CIA. Does anyone have any questions? I'm really moving along at quite a speed, but now might be a good time. Any questions or comments?
Yes, Paul. Johnny Cairns has got a question.
Yeah, Johnny.
Paul, how you doing?
Good, mate.
It's not really a question. I suppose. I've done quite a bit of work on this on my articles in Kennys and Ken, and I came across Mr. Brent Parker and put me in the direction of a guy called Travis Kirk, and he was a former defence attorney in Dallas, lived for 23 years.
Yep.
And Kirk told the FBI, and Kirk basically told the FBI that regarding presence in the basement, anyone not having status in law enforcement or the legal profession who had access to the Dallas Police Department facilities would have to have been known to Captain Fritz. He goes on and says it was the Captain Fritz's advantage that Oswald was killed, but it enabled him to close, in Fritz's words, a murder case based on circumstantial evidence, and that the Oswald case was bound to involve the Dallas Police Department, including Captain Fritz, in controversy for years to come. And he said, Jack Ruby matter, insofar as Captain Fritz is concerned, can be more easily handled by the Dallas authorities. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'd absolutely go along with that. We don't see too many. I really did look into Fritz's movements, and I guess his any opportunities to detect his fingerprints on how Oswald's shooting was able to happen. And I really, other than him being 6 feet in front of Oswald when he was shot, and keeping Oswald in the interrogations for most of the morning, going to the trouble of calling in Henry or Harry Holmes, the postal inspector. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. That Fritz knew everyone by sight, to look at, and if he didn't know them, he would have trusted them as being friendly media and things like that. But yeah, I'd certainly agree. Yeah.
Okay, carry on, Paul.
Great. So I'd move on to, I'm going to highlight two people, Harold Fuqua and Alfredia Riggs, two very, very interesting characters that, again, very, very overlooked in terms of their movements leading up to Oswald's transfer and shooting. So both have been porters at City Hall for a number of years. I think Fuqua was 7 years and Riggs was 6 years, come November of '63. Now they were actually a part of a group of, I count 7 people that were in this vicinity watching, all their media on this side, getting things set up. They were keeping out of the way. They thought it was all good in the hood. Just they were just going to watch Oswald's transfer and get on with it basically. But they were actually ordered to leave by Reserve Officer Alvis Brock, told to leave, which in itself is that you can understand why they would have been a little bit surprised by that, and some were able to testify to the Warren Commission and the FBI, but the Dallas Police Department didn't acknowledge them at all. They were actually here though for a fair chunk of time going into the supposed search of the basement car park. Now the search happened, but as I uncover in my book, it was absolutely cursory. It was far from a thorough search. It was literally checking. It was basically being done so the press could it was a PR exercise basically. But anyway, the 7 workers were standing over here watching. With them was a telephone operator by the name of Ruth. Don't know what happened to her after, but when Brock came along and told them to move along, they all piled into this service elevator and went up to the first floor, and their idea was that they would walk across the annex building over to the old City Hall building, still on the first or the ground floor, and basically watch Oswald's transfer happen from the behind the locked glass doors on the Commerce Street entrance into City Hall. So that's what they did. Oh, but interestingly about Reserve Officer Brock, he was one of the reserves that would also be ordered away from this post within, or just, I think for him it was just over half an hour before Oswald was brought out. But anyway, back to the City Hall workers. So they all walked through the annex building to the old City Hall. Now, what they stood there for upwards of about an hour, which does tally with the timings of things. But what Fuqua and Riggs did was they kind of had enough of that. They thought, no, we're going to go watch the transfer happen on TV instead. But as we'll see, the journey that they would go on would prove just exactly how unsecure or insecure City Hall was that day. So I've just got a bit of a layout here. We're going to track their path. let's see how we go. So we've got the Commerce Street entrance is about here. This is where all of the porters, the workers were standing. Fuqua and Riggs peeled away, left them, and basically retraced their journey back through to the annex building, through the accordion style metal gate, which I think we've all heard connected the two buildings. And what they did was they went literally back to the service elevator, and at the back of the elevator was a hatch. It was kind of like a service hatch at the time, and they were able to basically climb through that and go across a fire escape stairway at the back. And this was just basically a little pathway. Now, the service elevator stayed in place. That's because one of the porters that brought them up, he was ordered to leave it locked there in place. So that's what he did. These elevators were, the power is off. They weren't at all operational that day. But anyway, Fuqua and Riggs, what they were able to do was actually able to exit out of the outer door. Now, both were adamant that they locked the door behind them. That's a very important point. They locked it behind them, and they were able to do that just by turning the lock on the doorknob itself. So what they did was they walked down what a few people have described as an alleyway to Main Street, and then they turned west, moving along, and they actually stopped at the top of the Main Street ramp. And we can back that up because Roy Vaughan testified as much as well when he said that he saw some janitorial staff coming from an easterly direction. So they stood at the top of the ramp just to check out what was going on. Napoleon Daniels, he was standing about here, and he would actually testify to recognising, he was a former police officer that was made it his business to hang around the top of the Main Street ramp that day for some reason. He would testify to recognising one of the shoe shine or former porter workers as being one of the two men in Fuqua and Riggs that stopped there. But anyway, they did not stay there for long. They continued walking down Main Street, hung a left on Harwood Street, and then they stopped there and thought, okay, well, this is where we're going to need to be a bit careful. So Fuqua was the senior of the two. He told Riggs to basically go down these stairs, which and they're still there to this day, are at the side of the main entrance of each side, and see if the door was unlocked, because that was the door that led down to the basement of City Hall. And lo and behold, it was unlocked. So Riggs turned around and said, "Coast is clear, come down." There were no Dallas police personnel situated here, or if they were, they gave them a pass, let them through. So we have them coming down into the basement, and this is a hallway in the absence of, again, a schematic. This is the assembly room, or it was in these parts. This is where Oswald's press conferences were held. But what they would have done is then go down another set of stairs to the sub-basement locker room. Now, that's a very interesting room, because down there they encountered someone that basically told them, no, you don't need to stay here. The transfer is not going to be shown on TV anyway. There's no point watching it down here on TV. So who that person was, I strongly contend in my book, but incredibly suspicious when we think about the fact that this locker room, I gather it took up pretty much all of this area. It was massive. But a very interesting area, because it too was accessible from street level. It makes sense. It's where police would come and go at all times of the day to start and finish their shifts. Down there were payphones and vending machines and lockers and all sorts of things. So after that, we had, so the two gentlemen, Fuqua and Riggs, basically retraced their steps, and they would be, according to their testimonies, about here when Oswald was shot. Any questions or points?
No, press on, please, Paul.
Okay. Billy Grammer, this is a quick one. This is so I'm sure we're all familiar with Billy Grammer. The story goes, and I say it's a story because well, according to my findings, we can only really go on what he says, because he's the one that alleged that after Oswald's shooting, sorry, did he actually receive a phone call the night before from someone warning that Oswald would be killed in the basement if not transferred in secret. Grammer also said that the threat maker returned to an armoured car being used as a decoy. Now, how would he have known that detail? That wasn't even known at all to anyone on the third floor, Curry, Fritz, anyone that would have oversight of the transfer, Batchelor, Stevenson. So that's an interesting thing to make reference to only after the fact. And he said that the caller sounded like Jack Ruby, who he allegedly met with only the following day, but he wasn't so sure that it was Ruby during the call. So Grammer is an interesting one because obviously his story infers that Ruby called up and he was trying to make some kind of threat against Oswald to have the transfer put off, so he might not have to go through with shooting Oswald. But as I do in my book, I see quite a few flaws with Billy Grammer's take on it. He was never able to pinpoint a time of when the call came in. He apparently submitted an affidavit to Chief Curry, but Curry never spoke of it, was never able to produce it. No one at DPD could corroborate that was there at the time, Captain Fraser and co, that Grammer that such a threat had come in and Grammer had taken it down. And probably most importantly, the FBI didn't even touch Grammer. And you'll remember that I mentioned before that they were all over wanting to find out about as many associations between DPD personnel and Jack Ruby. So if this story had gotten to them, they obviously would have pulled Grammer over the coals, but they didn't interview him at all. Confusing witnesses, there are a few, and I'll go through this quickly. Fred Bieberdorf. Fred Bieberdorf was a medical student who was on duty. He was basically the first aid officer at the time. And he was with Fuqua, Riggs and the other porters and maintenance workers who were told to leave the eastern side of the basement, which he did. Now, where he went is not clear. Apparently, he just stayed around the hallway out the front of the jail office, which is not the best place to be when you potentially have 90 minutes or maybe even 2 hours, depending on when they were told to leave to kill. So, but it's not clear in any of his statements to the FBI or the Warren Commission where he was from when he was asked to leave to when Oswald was shot. Interestingly, the Dallas police didn't interview him either. When the shooting took place, he actually told the FBI that it took him several minutes to get to where Oswald was shot, which is absolutely ridiculous. There was no impenetrable wall of people preventing him from coming from any direction. He said that he was near the jail office when Oswald was shot and it took him several minutes to get from there. That was not the case. He would correct himself to the Warren Commission. He said it took him a minute to get to where Oswald was shot and then a few seconds to realise that Oswald wasn't obviously where he was shot and had been taken away and where he was. He obviously once he was able to get to Oswald in the jail office, he couldn't detect signs of life of Oswald, yet other people said that other witnesses said that they could. People like Detective Cutshaw, and I think Lavelle even said that Oswald still seemed to be conscious when he was taken into the jail office. Yet when Bieberdorf got to him, he couldn't detect a heartbeat. To be fair, though, it was very loud in there. He wouldn't have been able to hear it if he was trying to detect it with a stethoscope. So he gave CPR, which we could only assume would be the absolute last resort, manual chest compressions on someone that's been shot through the abdomen. And he gave another interesting little tidbit as well. Apparently, Oswald came back to life in the ambulance. He was thrashing around on the stretcher in the back of the ambulance. And this happened, in Bieberdorf's words, a few blocks from Parkland Hospital. Now, I don't know what way the ambulance would have been travelling to get Oswald to the hospital from City Hall, but the quickest and most direct way back then, and still now, according to Google Maps, is any way to Stemmons Freeway and just straight up a couple of junctions to Parkland. So a few blocks from Parkland Hospital. It just sounds like they were taking a magical mystery tour through, I don't know, Turtle Creek or Highland Park or wherever, Anyway, very strange guy. But probably the clincher for him, and this is another one of these oral history interviews, was in 2007. He actually said that Oswald was shot in the jail office. And the chap, I forget his name, Fagan, I think his name is, he didn't even pull him up on this and correct him, saying, no, he was shot out in the basement in the walkway to the car park. It was the old Fred Bieberdorf was able to say that and keep on going. Anyway, just a by the by. Wrapping up, Detective Cutshaw, Graves and Ramsey. Graves was an interesting one. You'll know him as being the detective that was holding Oswald by the left arm. His statement to the DPD was undated, unsigned, typewritten. As was Graves, as was Lavell's, as was Beck's, and a couple of others, which is interesting as well. But he said in his statement that Oswald was loaded into an ambulance immediately after being shot. Those words exactly. What was he looking at? What in the hell was he recalling? Another detective, James K. Ramsey, he was a little bit further up the ramp towards Commerce Street. He said Oswald was actually left in the basement before being taken into the jail office. So Ramsey, his story goes that he ran down the ramp, tried to help out with the scuffle, the melee on Ruby, helped that lot take him into the jail office, and then came back out and saw that Oswald was still left in the basement, which is demonstrably false. We know that was not the case. It was, I'm sure you've seen the footage. It's like a swarm of people, particularly over Ruby, just basically just engulfed him and Oswald to a lesser degree. It was only Lavelle and Combest that actually did anything with Oswald, but what you can bet is that Ruby was taken in first and Oswald followed straight after. But what Ramsey's saying is just crazy. And Cutshaw, Oswald was taken into the jail office on a stretcher. Again, what were these people saying? It's just absolutely nuts. So these basically some some vignettes from my book that I wanted to cover off on, and probably leave a few minutes now for a bit of Q&A or anything, any points that maybe the group wanted to raise or ask about. Neil, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, Paul. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah.
Tony Basing asking a question.
Yeah, we went into the main municipal hall about 20 years ago, I think Florence, looking for how to get into the basement other than down the ranks. And in the main hall, there was this large, quite heavy door, and I just made a beeline for it, grabbed hold of the handle and opened it. We went down the steps, and it comes out. I think on the first diagram you showed, it would be the top left-hand corner. So you're basically amongst the cars when we got down there, directly facing where Oswald was shot, right over the other side of the room.
Interesting.
I mean, it wasn't signposted or anything. I mean, it looked like a door you shouldn't go down. That's it.
It's strange because Carol and Pappas, before they come out in the when we see them in the footage, that you can even see them standing around for a good 10 seconds, maybe even 15. I think I'd clocked it as long as 15 seconds looking through the jail office window, waiting for the elevator to come down. So that kind of makes their time frame of coming down, racing down these stairs, taking a detour to wherever to get down to the basement and still have time 15 seconds before Oswald's elevator even came down. I just think what it means, I don't know, but it's just an interesting little side note to it. And Pappas in his
How did Ruby get into the basement? Because there was this contentious arguments about whether he passed X or Y on the ramp. And you could simply have gone into, what is it, City Hall and down this same staircase, which we took. It took about 10 seconds, actually.
Yeah, I'd have to look to exactly where those steps are, but the most tenable, and I'll back up John Armstrong and David Joseph's contention, is that he came through that eastern outer door that Fuqua and Riggs came through, and that's because the scene was being controlled. Reserve officers Worley and Brock had been moved away from the service elevator area. There was no one there. The scene was being controlled, so Ruby could be let in.
We came out roughly into that little section there, not through those external doors in behind the elevator, but we came out into that portion.
Yeah, Paul, there was half a dozen of us that went to City Hall in November.
Yep.
Part of our Dallas thing. It was one of our highlights. And there's probably 5 or 6 of us here in this room that went there. We've got loads of photographs. We did most of the floors. we did the jail. We did the conference room area. We went right up to where the shooting was. So if you'd like us to send photos,
I'd love that. Thank you. Absolutely.
I mean, they're obviously current day photos, but you work out some of the, some of the old offices and so forth.
Oh, totally. You just cannot find anything contemporaneous. Floor plans and even in that schematic which I showed you, the hand drawn one. There's just no there's no it's just the meter room and the there's no inklings of anything behind those walls. So please, it'd be great to get those.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we rode the jail elevator, and we were in the jail. We were in his cell.
Was it a slow moving elevator, or was it a normal? Was it just a normal one?
It was quite slow, wasn't it? It was quite slow, but I don't know if it accounts for the the suppositions that you've got about these press guys. But Bart, do you have a question?
Bart Kemp here. Just wanted to make you aware of everybody. I saw the Stone documentary, and in the Stone documentary there is really good quality footage of the actual murder of Oswald. It's 1080. So I ripped it, and I basically turned it into a set of stills, which is about almost 500-600 stills. And there were 2 things that really jumped out of that movie. Number one, Ruby was actually hit by the car that came back.
He was,
Pushed out of position, and that's why they get hold of him so quickly. Because he probably would have done more damage if he hadn't lost his balance, partially because of the car that coming back was supposed to be responsible. And the other thing was that the bell was basically standing over Oswald while stuff what was going on. It was practically like standing with Oswald lying down in the street. Your attention goes to the stuff while it's all happening, and then by using it in the stills. If you want those stills, I'm more than happy to send them to you.
Yeah, thanks, Bart. I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Are they uploaded on your website anywhere?
No.
Because it's their copyright issues for doing that. Because you've ripped them. Yeah. Yeah, well, it should be carved out, shouldn't it? Yeah. Is there another question?
No, that's it.
Scott Reed's got a question.
Hi, Scott.
Hi, Paul. Yeah, I'm just going to ask what your take is on. I mean, some people think that the car makes a couple of the warning beeps, that in some way that's like a signal. I've never really bought into that, but I just wondered if you thought of that.
I don't really. I'm the same as you, Scott. I don't really buy into it. It's fun to think about it being a signal, but I don't think it is. Doherty, who was in the car that Swain was trying to bring into position that Oswald was being led to, he had media. He was surrounded by people that were he said, out of position. That was both DPD and members of the media. So his car was completely surrounded by his account. So he sounded the horn to basically get them to move, because Beck had come out to get the cars into position. You remember that was about 30 seconds before Oswald emerged, and then obviously Swain came out before Fritz did. So I think that those horn blasts are completely innocent. If they were nefarious for any reason, it would have been to signal Fritz, but he didn't need that, because he did. And when Fritz comes out, you can see him scan the scene, and he does look to where Ruby was standing. So I really don't think that they had any part in it at all.
Okay, this is really easy to explain. They're going to tape on Lee's shooting channel, and basically it's an unedited tape, and you basically hear the car horns, because cars were driving in and out to make space in the parking garage. This starts 5 minutes before Oswald gets killed, and there's honking of horns every time, because people are in the place. Because they only see a short bit of the tape, they go, that's a signal, because it's just before he comes out. But there are several other car horns heard during that time in an unedited tape. I think it's an NBC tape. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. You want a question? Yeah, I've got one more question.
Yeah, well, where the times changed, just for the press and the media, was Oswald supposed to be moved at a different time originally?
So I didn't quite catch that. Were the times changed?
Did they change the time, the transfer for the benefit of the press?
No, I don't think so. The press started to get there, but before sunrise. People like Stephen Alexander, Henry Rabin, they were all getting there very early. So because it was set for 10 o'clock. It was all about getting a position, and then when, like I said, when Curry laid it out at 10:20 exactly how the transfer was going to be carried out, they all went down to the basement. And I don't know if you know, but originally the cameras were actually set up across from the jail office
Well, they could have done it in sort of without anybody knowing, couldn't they?
They could have.
They
What?
did.
Sorry.
The point was that they could have transferred him without actually telling the press when the transfer was.
100%. And I like to tell the story of Ruby's transfer. I'll be very quick. Almost 24 hours after Oswald was shot, it went like clockwork. And there's two reasons why. The press weren't notified, even though some press were there when Ruby was transferred. But Sheriff Decker and Chief Curry had no idea about it. They were kept completely out of the loop on it, and it went like clockwork. Exactly the same way. Brought down from, I think he came down from the 4th floor, Ruby, and out through the basement office into a car that Fritz was driving. It was coordinated. They would literally come in through the main street ramp, stop. Lavelle and I think it was Beck would bring Ruby out, and the car was taken straight out. No, there was a picture taken of it. It's on the University of North Texas history, but it went perfectly. They caught all the green lights on a Monday, and the Sheriff's Department didn't even know about it yet. They thankfully were able to obviously receive him without any issues. But yeah, it went to clockwork because yes, the press weren't involved, and neither were probably their biggest advocate, Curry.
I can't let you go without asking you, and I asked David Joseph this. When you see the shooting footage, you see the detective put a sack over.
Yeah, I
Oswald.
can tell you who that is.
And what's your conclusion?
It was Detective Lewis Miller.
Yeah.
Now Lewis Miller, he went and had the coffee with Blackie Harrison earlier that morning at the Deluxe Diner. Interestingly though, Miller, probably not surprisingly though, Miller was never asked about it. His explanation, and it was to the DPD only, I think, or the FBI, either way, his explanation was that Ruby was basically, his words, propelled to him. That's all he said. He didn't say, I happen to be carrying this, black, literally it is a bag, that he very clearly puts over a hatless Ruby at that time. So yes, I can tell you for sure that that was Lewis Miller, who himself is very, very suspect, and I do know him as being he's a part of my list of suspects in the book. He was very, very difficult with the Warren Commission. He refused to be sworn in. It actually meant that his testimony was put back the following day, and he only agreed to be sworn in that time when he was threatened with being taken to Washington and having to basically being subpoenaed and having to testify in front of the full Warren Commission panel. So yeah, that's how they were able to
That's very interesting. Well, look, we've got to go because your compatriot Greg Parker is waiting.
No worries.
Is it relevant? If it's anything to do with the Carcano, I'm not taking that question. Okay, so yeah, Paul, that was a very, very interesting presentation. I, for one, will be buying your book. I think it's a completely different insight, and it's about time somebody, did that and put it in writing. And I think that's a great effort that you've done that for us.
Terrific, thank you. It'll be online, Amazon, all of that. So no, I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with you all. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
So if we see you next year, you'll get platinum membership. All right, take
All
care.
good.
Okay, bye.
Thanks all. Cheers.